Arthur Conan Doyle, The Adventure of the Cardboard Box. In choosing a few typical cases to illustrate the remarkable mental qualities of my friend, Sherlock Holmes, I have endeavored, so far as possible, to select those which are least sensational, while still offering a wide field for his talents. Unfortunately, however, it is impossible to entirely separate the sensational from the criminal. A chronicler is faced with a dilemma. He must either sacrifice the details essential to his statement and thus give a false impression of the problem, or he must use the material which chance, rather than choice, has placed at his disposal. After this brief introduction, I shall proceed to my notes on a strange and, in its own way, terrible chain of events. It was a blisteringly hot August day. Baker Street was like an oven, and the dazzling glare of the sun upon the yellow brickwork of the house opposite was painful to the eyes. It was hard to believe that these were the same walls which had peered so gloomily through the winter fogs. Our blinds were half drawn, and Holmes lay curled upon the sofa, reading and rereading a letter which he had received by the morning post. As for myself, my term of service in India had trained me to endure heat better than cold, and a temperature of 90 degrees Fahrenheit did not particularly inconvenience me. But the morning papers were uninteresting. Parliament had risen. Everyone was out of town, and I yearned for the glades of the New Forest or the shingle of South Sea Beach. A depleted bank account, however, had forced me to postpone my holiday. As for my friend, neither the country nor the sea held any attractions for him. He loved to lie hidden in the midst of 5 million people, his feelers ever out, keenly alert to every rumor or suspicion of an unsolved crime. An appreciation of nature found no place among his many gifts, and he only changed his habits when he left the city villain to track down his country counterpart. Seeing that Holmes was too absorbed in his reading for conversation, I tossed aside my barren newspaper and, leaning back in my chair, fell into a brown study. Suddenly, my friend's voice interrupted my thoughts. "You are right, Watson," he said. "It is a most absurd way of settling a dispute." "Most absurd," I exclaimed. Then, suddenly realizing that he had read my unspoken thought, I started up in my chair and stared at him in blank amazement. "What is this, Holmes?" I cried. "I cannot imagine how you could possibly know what I was thinking." He laughed heartily at my bewilderment. "Do you remember," said he, "that not long ago, when I read you a passage from one of Poe's sketches, in which a close observer follows the unspoken thoughts of his companion, you were inclined to regard it merely as a tour de force, a mere display of the author's skill? I remarked then that I was constantly in the habit of doing the same, but you expressed your skepticism. Oh no, perhaps not with your lips, my dear Watson, but certainly with your eyebrows. And so, when I saw you throw down your newspaper and sink into thought, I was very happy to have the opportunity of reading your mind and eventually breaking in upon it, as a proof that I had been in rapport with you. But I was still far from satisfied. In the example which you read to me, I said, the observer drew his conclusions from the actions of the man he was watching. If I remember correctly, the man stepped over some stones, looked up at the stars, and so on. But I have been sitting quite still in my chair. What possible clue could I have given you? You do yourself an injustice. The features are given to man as the means by which he shall express his emotions, and yours serve you faithfully. Do you mean to say that you read my thoughts from my face? Your face, and especially your eyes. Perhaps you cannot yourself recall how your reverie began. No, I cannot. Then I will tell you. After throwing down your newspaper, which was the act which first drew my attention to you, you sat for half a minute with a vacant gaze. Then your eyes fixed themselves upon your newly framed picture of General Gordon, and I saw by the alteration in your face that a train of thought had been started, but did not lead very far. Your eyes flashed across to the unframed portrait of Henry Ward Beecher, which stand upon the top of your books. Then you glanced up at the wall, and of course your meaning was obvious. You were thinking that if the portrait were framed, it would just cover that bare space and correspond with Gordon's picture over there. You have followed me wonderfully, I exclaimed. So far, I could hardly have gone astray. But now your thoughts went back to Beecher, and you looked hard at it, as if you were studying the character and his features. Then you ceased to frown, but you still continued to look at the portrait, and your face grew thoughtful. You were recalling the incidents of Beecher's career. I was well aware that you could not do this without thinking of the mission which he undertook on behalf of the North at the time of the Civil War, for I remember you expressing your indignation at the way in which he was received by the more turbulent sections of our people. You felt so strongly about it that I knew you could not think of Beecher without thinking of that also. When a moment later I saw your eyes wander away from the picture, I suspected that your mind had now turned to the Civil War of its own accord, and when I observed that your lips set, your eyes sparkled, and your hands clenched the arms of your chair, I was then certain that you were indeed thinking of the gallantry displayed upon both sides in that desperate struggle. But then again your face grew sad. You shook your head. You were dwelling upon the horrors of war and the useless waste of life. Your hand stole towards your own old wound, and a smile quivered on your lips, which showed me that the ridiculous side of this method of settling international disputes had forced itself upon your mind. At this point I agreed with you that it was preposterous, and was glad to find that all my deductions had been correct. Absolutely, said I, and now that you have explained it, I confess that I am as amazed as before. It was very superficial, my dear Watson, I assure you. I should not have intruded it upon your attention had you not shown some incredulity the other day. But I have in my hands here a problem which may prove to be more difficult of solution than this little essay in thought reading. Have you observed in the paper a short news item regarding the remarkable contents of a packet posted to a Miss Cushing of Cross Street, Croydon? No, I saw nothing. Ah, then you must have overlooked it. Just toss the paper over to me. Here it is, under the financial column. Perhaps you will be good enough to read it aloud. I picked up the paper which he had thrown back to me and read the paragraph indicated. It was headed, "A Gruesome Parcel. Miss Susan Cushing, living at Cross Street, Croydon, has been made the victim of what must be regarded as a peculiar and revolting practical joke, unless it should prove to have a more sinister meaning. At 2 o'clock yesterday afternoon, the postman delivered a small packet wrapped in brown paper. It was a cardboard box filled with coarse salt. On emptying the salt, Miss Cushing was horrified to find 2 human ears, apparently quite freshly severed. The box had been posted in Belfast on the previous morning. There is no indication of the sender, and the matter is the more mysterious as Miss Cushing, who is a maiden lady of 50, lives a most retired life, and has so few acquaintances or correspondence that she very rarely receives anything by post. However, some years ago, while residing at Penge, she let apartments in her house to 3 young medical students, whom she was obliged to get rid of on account of their noisy and irregular habits. The police are of the opinion that this outrage may be the work of these young men, who wish to pay off a grudge against Miss Cushing and to frighten her by sending her these specimens from the dissecting room. Some plausibility is given to this theory by the fact that one of these students came from the north of Ireland, and, to the best of Miss Cushing's belief, from Belfast. In the meantime, A vigorous investigation is being carried on by Mr. Lestrade, one of the most experienced agents of our detective force. That is all from the Daily Chronicle, said Holmes, as I finished the article. Now let us hear from our friend Lestrade. I had a note from him this morning, in which he says, I think that this case is very much to your taste. We hope to see it through to the end, but we have found some difficulty in the lack of material. We have, of course, telegraphed to the Belfast post office, but a great many packets were posted upon that day, and they can tell us nothing about this one, nor do they remember the sender. The box is a half-pound one of honeydew tobacco, and it tells us nothing. The medical student theory still appears to me to be the most probable, but if you have a few spare hours, I should be very happy to see you here. I shall be either at this house or in the police station all day. What do you say to that, Watson? Can you despise the heat and come with me to Croydon on the off chance of a new case for your annals? I was just wondering what I should do with myself. Then you shall have an occupation. Ring for our boots and summon a hansom. I shall be ready in a minute, as soon as I have changed my dressing gown and filled my cigar case. While we were in the train, there was a fall of rain, and at Croydon the heat was less oppressive than in the capital. Holmes had sent a telegram before our departure, and Lestrade, as alert, dapper, and ferret-like as ever, met us at the station. In 5 minutes we were in Cross Street, where Miss Cushing resided. It was a very long street of 2-story brick houses, neat and somewhat prim, with women in aprons gossiping upon the white stone doorsteps. Halfway down the street, Lestrade stopped and tapped at a door, which was opened by a small servant girl. We were shown into the sitting room, where Miss Cushing was seated. She had a placid face, with large, gentle eyes and graying hair which curved over her temples. She was engaged in embroidering an antimacassar, and by her side was a basket of many-colored silks. "Those nasty things are in the outhouse," she said, as Lestrade entered the room. "I wish you would take them away altogether." "I shall do so, Miss Cushing. I only kept them here so that my friend Mr. Holmes might see them in your presence." "Why my presence, sir?" "In case he wished to ask you any questions." "What is the use of asking more questions when I tell you that I know absolutely nothing about it?" "Quite so, madam," said Holmes, in his soothing way. "I have no doubt that you have been sufficiently annoyed over this matter." "I have indeed, sir. I am a quiet, respectable woman, and I am not used to seeing my name in the newspapers or having the police in my house. I will not have those things brought in here, Mr. Lestrade. If you wish to see them, you must go to the outhouse." The small outhouse was in the narrow garden at the back of the building. Lestrade went in and brought out a yellow cardboard box, a piece of brown paper, and some string. There was a bench at the end of the path, and we sat upon it, while Holmes examined the articles which Lestrade handed to him one by one. "A most interesting string," he remarked, holding it up to the light and sniffing it. "What do you make of this string, Lestrade?" "It is tarred." "Exactly. It is a piece of tarred twine. You have also, no doubt, remarked that Miss Cushing has cut the string with scissors, as may be seen by the 2 clean-cut ends on either side. That is of high importance." "I cannot see where the importance comes in," said Lestrade. "The importance lies in the fact that the knot has been left intact, and that this knot is of a peculiar character. It is very neatly tied." "I had already made a note of that," said Lestrade, with a touch of self-complacency. "So much for the string," said Holmes, smiling. "Now for the wrapper. Brown paper, with a distinct smell of coffee. What, did you not observe it? There can be no doubt about it. The address is in printed letters, somewhat roughly formed. Miss Susan Cushing, Cross Street, Croydon. Done with a broad-pointed pen, probably a J pen, and very poor ink. The word Croydon was at first spelled with an E, which was afterwards altered to an O. The packet was directed, then, by a man. The writing is clearly masculine, of limited education and unacquainted with Croydon. So far, so good. The box is a yellow, half-pound honeydew tobacco box, with nothing distinctive about it save 2 thumb marks on the left-hand bottom corner. It is filled with coarse salt of the kind which is used for the curing of hides and other raw industrial purposes. And embedded in the salt is a most peculiar enclosure. With these words he took out the 2 ears, and, having laid a board across his knee, he began to examine them attentively, while Lestrade and I, standing on either side of him, leaned forward and looked alternately at these gruesome souvenirs and at the serious, concentrated face of our companion. Finally, he put them back into the box, and sat for some time, lost in deep thought. "You have observed, of course," he said at last, "that the ears are not a pair." "Yes, I noticed that. But if this were a joke played by some medical students, it would be as easy for them to send 2 odd ears as a pair." "Quite so. But this is no joke. You are sure of that. Everything points away from it. In the anatomical schools, a preservative fluid is injected into the bodies. There is no trace of it here. Furthermore, these ears are fresh. They have been severed with a blunt instrument, which would hardly happen if a student had done it. Again, carbolic or rectified spirits would be the preservatives which a medical man would naturally use, and certainly not coarse salt. I repeat that this is no practical joke, but that we are in the presence of a serious crime. A slight shudder passed through my frame as I heard Holmes's words and saw the darkened look upon his face. Behind his grim introduction there lay something strange, inexplicable, and terrible. Lestrade, however, shook his head like a man who is only half convinced. "There are certainly some points against the joke theory," he said, "but there are much stronger arguments against any other. We know that this woman has lived the most quiet and respectable of lives, both in Penge and here, for the last 20 years. She has hardly been away from her home for a day during that time. Why on earth, then, should a criminal send her the proofs of his guilt, especially as she, unless she is a consummate actress, understands as little of the matter as we do?" "That is the problem which we have to solve," Holmes answered, "and I, for my part, shall set out with the assumption that my reasoning is correct and that a double murder has been committed. One of these ears is a woman's, small, finely formed, and pierced for an earring. The other is a man's, sunburnt, and also pierced for an earring. These 2 people are presumably dead, or we should have heard of them before this. Today is Friday. The packet was posted on Thursday morning. The tragedy, then, occurred on Wednesday or Tuesday or earlier. If these 2 people were murdered, who but their murderer could have sent Miss Cushing this token of his crime? We may take it that the sender of the packet is the man whom we are seeking, but he must have some strong reason for sending it to Miss Cushing. What could that reason be? To let her know, perhaps, that the deed was done, or, perhaps, to cause her pain? But in that case, she must know who the man is. Does she know? I doubt it. If she knew, why should she call the police? She might have buried the ears, and no one would have been the wiser. That is what she would have done if she had wished to shield the criminal. But if she does not wish to shield him, she would give his name. There is a tangle here which must be straightened out." He spoke rapidly, in a high, clear voice, gazing out with unseeing eyes over the garden fence. Then he rose briskly to his feet and turned towards the house. "I have a few questions to ask Miss Cushing," said he. "In that case, I will leave you," said Lestrade, "for I have another small business to attend to. I think that I have nothing more to learn from Miss Cushing." You will find me at the police station." "We shall look in on our way to the station," Holmes replied. In a moment we were back in the front room, where Miss Cushing was still placidly embroidering her antimacassar. She laid it down on her lap as we entered and looked at us with a frank, searching gaze from her blue eyes. "I am convinced, sir," she said, "that this is a mistake and that the packet was never intended for me at all. I have said so several times to the gentleman from Scotland Yard, but he only laughs at me. To my knowledge, I have not an enemy in the world, so why should anyone play such a trick upon me?" "I'm inclined to agree with you, Miss Cushing," said Holmes, sitting down beside her. "In fact, I think it is more than probable that—" He fell silent, and looking at him, I was surprised to see that he was staring intently at her profile. A look of surprise, followed by one of satisfaction, flashed across his eager face, but when she turned to him to discover the cause of his silence, he had already regained his composure. I, in my turn, looked closely at her. Her smoothly brushed, graying hair, her neat cap, her small gilded earrings, and her placid features. But I saw nothing that could account for my friend's evident excitement. "I have a few questions to ask you." "Oh, I am weary of these questions," Miss Cushing cried irritably. "I believe you have 2 sisters." "How could you know that?" The moment I entered the room, I observed a group portrait of 3 women upon the mantelpiece. "One of them is undoubtedly yourself, and the others are so like you that there could be no mistaking the relationship." "Yes, you're quite right. Those are my sisters, Sarah and Mary." And here, beside me, hangs another portrait taken in Liverpool of a younger sister and a man who, judging by his dress, is a steward. I see that she was unmarried at the time. You are very quick to notice things. It is my profession. Well, you're quite right. But she married Mr. Browner a few days later. When the picture was taken, he was on the South American line, but he loved my sister so much that he could not bear the long absences from her. So he joined the boats that run between Liverpool and London. Not the Conqueror, by any chance? No, the Mayday, as far as I know. Jim came to see me here once. That was before he broke his pledge. After that, he always drank when he was on shore, and the least bit of it made him like a madman. Ah, it was a bad day when he took to the bottle again. First he quarreled with me, then with Sarah, and now Mary has stopped writing to us, and we don't know what has become of them. The subject was evidently a painful one for Miss Cushing. Like most lonely people, she was shy at first, but she became extremely talkative in the end. She told us many details about her brother-in-law, the steward, and then, passing to her former lodgers, the medical students, she gave us a long list of their grievances, their names, and the hospitals where they worked. Holmes listened attentively, asking a question from time to time. "Now about your middle sister, Sarah," he said. "It seems strange that you do not live together, since you are both unmarried." "Ah, you don't know her temper, or you wouldn't wonder. I tried it when I first moved to Croydon, and we lived together until quite recently. It is only 2 months since we parted. I don't like to speak ill of my own sister, but Sarah was always one to interfere and find fault. You say that she has quarreled with your Liverpool relations?" "Yes, and at one time they were the best of friends. She even went to live there to be near them. And now she cannot find words hard enough for Jim Browner. For the last 6 months she lived here, she did nothing but talk of his drinking and his bad habits. I expect he caught her in some gossip and gave her a piece of his mind. That was how the trouble began." "Thank you, Miss Cushing," said Holmes, rising and bowing. "Your sister Sarah lives in Wallington, I believe, in New Street. Good day to you. I am sorry to have troubled you about a matter with which, as you say, you have no concern." When we reached the street, A cab was passing, and Holmes hailed it. "How far is it to Wallington?" he asked. "Only about a mile, sir." "Very good. Get in, Watson. We must strike while the iron is hot." Simple as the case is, it has some most instructive features. Just stop at the telegraph office as we pass, will you? Sherlock Holmes, The Adventure of the Cardboard Box, Part 6. Holmes sent a short telegram, and for the rest of the journey, he sat back in the cab, his hat tilted over his nose to keep off the sun. Our driver pulled up at a house similar to the one we had just left. My companion ordered him to wait, but as he reached for the knocker, the door opened, and a grave young gentleman in black appeared on the threshold, a very shiny top hat in his hand. "Is Miss Cushing at home?" Holmes asked. "Miss Sarah Cushing is seriously ill," he replied. "Since yesterday, she has developed symptoms of severe brain fever. As her medical attendant, I cannot take the responsibility of allowing anyone to see her. I should advise you to call again in 10 days. He pulled on his gloves, closed the door, and strode away down the street. "Well, if we can't, we can't," said Holmes cheerfully. "Perhaps she could not, or would not, have told you much," I remarked. "I did not need her to tell me anything. I only wanted to look at her. However, I think I have all that I require. Drive us to some decent hotel where we may have breakfast, and after that we shall visit our friend Lestrade at the police station." We had an excellent breakfast. At the table Holmes would talk of nothing but violins, narrating with great enthusiasm how he had purchased a Stradivarius, worth at least 500 guineas, for 55 shillings from a second-hand dealer in the Tottenham Court Road. From violins he drifted off to Paganini, and we sat for an hour over a bottle of claret while he told me story after story of that extraordinary man. It was late in the afternoon, and the hot glare of the sun had faded into a pleasant, mellow light by the time we reached the police station. Lestrade was waiting for us at the door. "A telegram for you, Mr. Holmes," said he. "Ah, it is the answer." He tore it open, glanced over it, and tucked it into his pocket. "It is all right," said he. "Have you found out anything?" "I have found out everything." "What?" Lestrade stared at him in amazement. "You are joking. I was never more serious in my life. A shocking crime has been committed, and I think I have now laid bare every detail of it." "And the criminal?" Holmes scribbled a few words upon the back of his visiting card and tossed it over to Lestrade. "That is the man," he said. "You cannot effect an arrest until tomorrow evening at the earliest. I should prefer that you do not mention my name in connection with the case, as I only desire to be associated with those problems which present some real difficulty. Come, Watson." We strode away to the station, while Lestrade remained standing there, gazing in silent wonder at the card which Holmes had thrown him. "In this case," said Sherlock Holmes, as we sat that evening over our cigars in our rooms at Baker Street, "as in those investigations which you have chronicled under the titles of A Study in Scarlet and The Sign of Four, we have been compelled to reason backward from effects to causes. I have written to Lestrade asking him to supply us with those missing details which he will only learn after he has secured his man. That we need not worry about, for despite his lack of brilliance, he will hang on like a bulldog if he once understands what he has to do. It is that tenacity which has made him what he is at Scotland Yard." "Then you are not entirely clear as to the facts?" I asked. "I am clear as to the main ones. We know who has committed this foul deed, though one of the victims is still unknown to us. Surely you have reached your own conclusions? You evidently suspect this Jim Browner, the steward of the Liverpool boat? Oh, it is more than suspicion. and yet I can see nothing but very vague indications. On the contrary, to my mind, nothing could be clearer. Let us review the main steps of our investigation. You will remember that we approached the case with an absolutely open mind, which is always an advantage. We had no theory. We went there simply to observe and to draw inferences from our observations. What do we see first? A very quiet and respectable woman who appeared to have no secrets, and a photograph from which I learned that she had 2 younger sisters. It occurred to me then that the box might have been intended for one of them. I set the idea aside, however, to be either confirmed or destroyed later. Then, as you will remember, we went into the garden and saw the extraordinary contents of the small yellow box. The string was such as is used by sailmakers, and at once the smell of the sea was in our investigation. When I observed that it was tied with a common sailor's knot, that the packet had been posted at a port, and that the male ear was pierced for an earring, a thing much more common among sailors than landsmen, it became quite clear to me that all the actors in this tragedy were to be found among seafaring folk. Having examined the inscription upon the packet, I found that it was addressed to Miss S. Cushing. The eldest sister would, of course, be addressed simply as Miss Cushing, and although her name begins with S, the same initial might belong to one of the other 2. In that case, the investigation would have had to start again upon an entirely different basis. It was to clarify this point that I returned to the house. I was about to assure Miss Cushing that I believed a mistake had been made, when, as you may remember, I suddenly fell silent. The fact is that I had unexpectedly seen something which amazed me, and which at the same time narrowed the field of our inquiry in a most extraordinary way. As a medical man, Watson, you are aware that there is no part of the human body which varies so much as the ear. Each ear is, as a rule, quite distinctive and differs from all others. In the Anthropological Journal for last year, you will find 2 short monographs from my pen upon this subject. I had, therefore, examined the ears in the box with the eyes of specialists, and had carefully noted their anatomical peculiarities. Imagine my surprise, then, when on looking at Miss Cushing, I perceived that her ear corresponded exactly with the female ear which I had just been inspecting. The coincidence was inconceivable. There was the same somewhat shortened pinna, the same broad curve of the upper part, the same formation of the inner cartilage. In all essential points, it was the same ear. Of course, I at once realized the enormous importance of this discovery. It was evident that the victim was a blood relation, and probably a very close one, of Miss Cushing. I began to talk to her about her family, and you remember that she at once gave us some most valuable details. First, that her sister's name is Sarah, and that her address until recently was the same, so that it was easy to see how the mistake occurred and for whom the packet was intended. Then we heard of the steward who was married to the 3rd sister, and learned that he had at one time been very intimate with Miss Sarah, and that she had even moved to Liverpool to be near the Browners, though they later quarreled. After this quarrel, all communication between them ceased for several months, so that if Browner had decided to send a packet to Miss Sarah, he would undoubtedly have sent it to her old address. And now the matter began to clear up in a most astonishing fashion. We learned of the existence of this steward, a man of an unbalanced, impulsive nature. You remember he threw up a good situation so as not to be long away from his wife, and a man, moreover, of intemperate habits. We had reason to believe that his wife had been murdered, and that a man, evidently a sailor, had been killed at the same time. Jealousy, of course, was the motive which suggested itself most naturally. But why should these proofs of the crime be sent to Miss Sarah Cushing? probably because during her stay in Liverpool, she had played a prominent part in the events which led to the tragedy. Notice that the steamers of this line call it Belfast, Dublin, and Waterford, so that, assuming Browner had committed the crime and then immediately joined his ship, the May Day, Belfast would be the first place from which he could post his terrible packet. But at this stage, another solution was possible, and although I judged it to be very unlikely, I determined to test it before moving further. It might be that some unsuccessful lover had killed Mr. and Mrs. Browner, and that the male ear belonged to the husband. I therefore sent a telegram to my friend Algar of the Liverpool police, asking him to find out if Mrs. Browner was at home, and if Mr. Browner had sailed on the May Day. Then we set out for Wallington to see Miss Sarah. I was curious, first of all, to see how far the family ear was repeated in her. Besides, she could, of course, give us very important information, though I had little hope that she would be willing to do so. She must have known of what had happened the day before, for all Croydon was ringing with it, and she alone could understand for whom the packet was intended. If she had wished to aid justice, she would probably have communicated with the police already. At any rate, it was our duty to see her, and so we went. We found that the news of the arrival of the packet, for her illness dated from that moment, had caused her such a shock as to bring on a brain fever. It was thus confirmed beyond doubt that she understood the significance of the parcel, but it was equally clear that we must wait some time before she could give us any assistance. However, we were not dependent upon her aid. The answers were waiting for us at the police station, where Algar had sent them at my request. Nothing could have been more conclusive. Mrs. Browner's house had been closed for more than 3 days, and the neighbors supposed that she had gone south to visit her relatives. At the shipping office, it was confirmed that Browner had sailed on the May Day, which, by my calculations, should reach the Thames tomorrow evening. When he arrives, he will be met by the obtuse but resolute Lestrade, and I have no doubt that we shall learn all the remaining details. Sherlock Holmes was not mistaken in his expectations. 2 days later, he received a bulky envelope containing a short note from the detective and a typewritten document several folio pages in length. "Well, Lestrade has caught him," said Holmes, glancing at me. "Perhaps you would be interested to hear what he writes. My dear Mr. Holmes, in accordance with the plan which we formulated for the purpose of testing our theories, that we is magnificent, is it not, Watson? I went yesterday at 6 o'clock in the evening to the Albert Dock and boarded the steamer May Day, which runs on the Liverpool, Dublin, and London line. Upon inquiry, I found that a steward named James Browner was on board, and during the voyage had behaved so strangely that the captain had been compelled to relieve him of his duties. Going below to where his berth was situated, I found him sitting on a chest, with his head in his hands, rocking himself to and fro. He is a big, powerful fellow, clean-shaven and very swarthy, somewhat like Aldridge, who helped us in the matter of the bogus laundry. When he heard what I wanted, he sprang to his feet, and I put my whistle to my lips to call the 2 river police who were waiting outside. But he seemed to collapse entirely and allowed the handcuffs to be slipped on without any resistance. We took him to the station and seized his chest, hoping to find some incriminating evidence. But except for a large sharp knife, such as almost every sailor carries, we found nothing to reward our efforts. It turned out, however, that we required no evidence, for when he was brought before the inspector, he expressed a desire to make a statement, which was, of course, taken down by our shorthand writer. We have had 3 copies typed, one of which I enclose. The case has proved, as I always thought, to be extremely simple, but I am grateful to you for the assistance you gave me in investigating it. With kindest regards, Yours very sincerely, George Lestrade. Humph. It was indeed a very simple investigation, Holmes remarked, but I doubt if it appeared so to him at the beginning when he first applied to us. However, let us see what Jim Browner himself has to say. Here is his statement, made to Inspector Montgomery at the Shadwell Police Station. Fortunately, it is a shorthand report. Do I want to say anything? Yes, I have a great deal to say. I want to tell it all, straight out. You can hang me or let me go. I don't care. I tell you that I haven't had a wink of sleep since it happened. I suppose if I sleep now, it will be the sleep that has no waking. Sometimes his face is before me, but more often hers. It's always there. He looks surly and dark, but she has such a look of surprise. Ah, poor lamb! How could she help but be surprised when she read death upon the face that had never looked at her but with love? But it was all Sarah's fault, and may the curse of a man whose life she has ruined rest upon her head and wither the blood in her veins. Don't think I am making excuses. I know I took to drink again and behaved like a brute, but she would have forgiven me. She would have clung to me like a rope to a block if that woman had never crossed our threshold. For Sarah Cushing loved me. That's the root of the whole business. She loved me until her love turned to a deadly hatred when she found that the footprint of my wife in the mud meant more to me than her whole body and soul. There were 3 sisters. The eldest was just a good woman, the second was a devil, and the third was an angel. When I married, Sarah was 33 and Mary was 29. We set up our own home, and we were happy, happier than I can tell you. And in all of Liverpool, there was no woman better than my Mary. And then we invited Sarah for a week, and that week turned into a month, and then more, until she became a member of our family. In those days, I was a teetotaler. We were saving a bit, and we lived comfortably. My God, who could have thought it would all end like this? Who could have imagined it? I usually came home for Saturdays and Sundays, and sometimes, if the steamer was delayed for loading, I would be free for a whole week. So, I saw a good deal of my sister-in-law, Sarah. She was a fine-looking woman, tall, black-haired, quick and high-spirited, with her head held high and sparks like flint in her eyes. But I never even had a thought for her while my little Mary was by my side. God be my witness. Sometimes it seemed to me that she liked to sit alone with me or to coax me out for a walk, but I thought nothing of it. But one evening my eyes were opened. I had come from the ship. My wife was out, but Sarah was at home. "Where's Mary?" I asked. "Oh, she has gone to pay some bills." I began to pace the room in my impatience. "Jim, can't you be happy for 5 minutes without Mary?" she asked. "It's a poor lookout for me if my company isn't enough for you even for that short time." Now, sister," I said, and kindly reached out my hand to her. She seized it with both of hers, hands as hot as if she were in a fever. I looked into her eyes and read it all there. She didn't need to speak, and neither did I. I frowned and snatched my hand away. She stood silent beside me for a moment. Then she raised her hand and patted me on the shoulder. "Steady, old Jim," she said, and with a light laugh, as if she were mocking me, she ran out of the room. And from that time on, Sarah hated me with all her soul, and she was a woman who knew how to hate. I was a fool to let her stay on with us, a drunken fool, but I never said a word to Mary, for I knew it would grieve her. Everything went on almost as before, but after a time I began to notice that Mary had changed. She had always been so trusting and simple-minded, but now she became strange and suspicious, always questioning where I had been, what I was doing, from whom I received letters, what was in my pockets, and all such nonsense. Every day she grew more fretful and irritable, and we were forever quarreling over trifles. I did not know what to think. Sarah avoided me now, but she and Mary were inseparable. I can see now how she was scheming and setting my wife against me, but at the time I was as blind as a mole. Then I took to drink again, but that would never have happened if Mary had stayed the same. Now she had a reason to feel a loathing for me, and the rift between us grew wider. And then this Alec Fairbairn appeared, and everything went to the devil. At first he came to my house on Sarah's account, but soon he was visiting us. He had a way with him and made friends easily wherever he went. He was a dashing fellow, free and easy, smart and curly-haired. He had been all over the world and could talk well what he had seen. I don't deny he was good company, and for a sailor, he was uncommonly civil. You could tell there was a time when he spent more time on the bridge than on the forecastle. He was always dropping in, and during that whole month, it never once crossed my mind that his soft ways and smooth talk could lead to trouble. At last, something made me suspicious, and from that hour I knew no peace. It was a small thing. I came into the parlor unexpectedly, and as I crossed the threshold, I saw a look of joy on my wife's face. But when she saw who it was, the light died out of her eyes, and she turned away with a look of disappointment. That was enough for me. My step was the only one she could have mistaken for Alec Fairbairn's. Had I met him then, I would have killed him on the spot, for I always lose my head when my blood is up. Mary saw the devil's fire in my eyes. She rushed to me, caught me by the sleeve, and cried, "Don't, Jim, don't." "Where is Sarah?" I asked. "In the kitchen," she answered. "Sarah," I said, walking in, "let that man never darken this door again." "Why?" she asked. "Because I say so." "Is that it?" she said. "If my friends are not good enough for this house, then I am not good enough for it either." "You can do as you please," I said, "but if Fairbairn shows his face here again, I'll send you his ear as a gift." I suppose my face frightened her, for she didn't say a word, and she left us that very evening. I don't know whether she did it from pure malice, or she thought to drive me away from my wife by egging her on to be unfaithful. In any case, she took a house 2 streets away and started letting rooms to sailors. Fairbairn used to stay there, and Mary would go there to have tea with her sister and him. How often she went, I don't know, but once I tracked her down, and as I was forcing the door, Fairbairn escaped like a cowardly cur, jumping over the back wall of the garden. I threatened to kill my wife if I ever saw them together again, and I led her home. She was sobbing, trembling, and as white as a sheet. Not a trace of love remained between us now. I saw that she hated and feared me, and when that thought drove me back to drink, she loathed me all the more. Meanwhile, Sarah found she could not make a living in Liverpool and left, as I understood, to join her sister in Croydon. At home, everything went on as before, and then came that last week when a disaster happened and my ruin came upon me. It was like this. We had cleared on a May day for a 7-day voyage, but a heavy cask broke loose and smashed through the bulkhead, so we had to put back into port for 12 hours. I went ashore and headed home, thinking what a surprise it would be for my wife, and hoping that perhaps she would be glad to see me so soon. With that thought, I turned into our street, and just then a cab drove past me with her sitting inside, next to Fairbairn. They were both chatting and laughing, with never a thought for me, while I stood and watched them from the pavement. I tell you the truth, I give you my word, from that moment I was not myself. When I look back, it all seems like a hazy dream. I have been drinking heavily of late, and everything combined to drive me clean mad. Even now, something is thumping in my head like a riveting hammer, But that morning there was a whole Niagara roaring and buzzing in my ears. I gave chase to the cab. I had a heavy oak stick in my hand, and I tell you, I lost my head at once. But as I ran, I decided to be cunning and fell back a bit so I could see them without being seen. Soon they stopped at the station. There was a great crowd at the ticket office, so I got quite close to them, but they never saw me. They took tickets for New Brighton. I did the same, but sat 3 carriages further back. When we arrived, they walked along the parade, and I followed 100 yards behind. At last, I saw them hire a boat. It was a very hot day, and they evidently thought it would be cooler on the water. Now they were delivered into my hands. There was a light mist on the water, and you couldn't see more than a few hundred yards. I took a boat as well and rowed after them. I could dimly see them ahead, but they were moving almost as fast as I was, and they must have been a good mile from shore before I caught them up. The mist surrounded us like a curtain. Oh, Lord! I shall never forget their faces when they saw who was in the boat that was bearing down on them. She screamed with a voice I didn't recognize. He began to swear like a madman and jab at me with an oar. He must have seen death in my eyes. I dodged and struck him with my stick. His head cracked like an egg. I might have spared her, perhaps, despite all my madness, but she threw her arms around him, crying and calling him Alec. I struck again, and she fell beside him. I was like a wild beast that had tasted blood. If Sarah had been there, I swear to God, she would have gone after them too. I drew my knife, and well enough. It gave me a sort of savage joy to think what Sarah would feel when she received that and saw what she had brought about. Then I lashed the bodies to the boat, stove, and a plank, and waited until they sank. I was sure the boatmen would think they had got lost in the fog and been carried out to sea. I cleaned myself up, pulled back to shore, returned to my ship, and not a soul suspected a thing. That night, I made up the packet for Sarah Cushing, and the next day, I posted it from Belfast. Now you know the whole truth. You can hang me or do what you like with me, but you cannot punish me as I am already punished. Whenever I shut my eyes, I see those 2 faces. They keep looking at me, just as they looked when my boat broke through the mist. I killed them quickly, but they're killing me slowly. One more night like this, and by morning I shall either be mad or dead. You won't put me in a dark cell alone, sir? I beg you, don't do that, and may you be dealt with on your last day as you deal with me now. What is the meaning of it? Watson, said Holmes, solemnly, as he laid down the paper. What is the object of this circle of misery and violence and fear? It must tend to some end, or else our universe is ruled by chance, which is unthinkable. But what end? There is the great, standing perennial problem to which the human mind as yet indicates no solution.